In this video, I'll be showing you how to remove and clean a furnace or air conditioner blower motor wheel. And just so you know, even if you have an annual furnace inspection and cleaning, most companies do not include the blower wheel cleaning as part of that package. If you want that cleaned, that would be a separate charge. And the price that some of these companies charge to do this job might give you a shock. So if this is a project you're willing to tackle yourself, let me show you how it's done. Of course, the first thing we're going to do before we do anything is to make sure that the power to the unit is off. To begin with, I'm going to go ahead and pull this cover door off. On my furnace, it's just one big door. On yours, it might be two separate doors. If you're not sure where your blower motor is, then just go ahead and take both doors off. On this carrier furnace, the blower motor is located behind this door right here, which is held in by two screws right up on top. So let's take those screws out and get to our blower motor. If you're as lucky as me, you're going to have a lot of room around the blower motor and there's not going to be a lot of stuff in front of it. But most people are probably not going to be this lucky. You're going to have more stuff in front of it. So what you're going to have to do is to take off all the stuff that's in the way so you can pull this whole blower housing assembly out. In my case, I just have a screw right over here and one over here that is holding this control board assembly in place. So if I take these two screws out, this thing should drop. A lot of times you're not going to have to disconnect any wires in order to get this housing out. You can simply push it out of the way. Sometimes you're going to have some zip ties. You can simply snip those off if they're in the way, just to give you more slack with the wires. So you can take this assembly out and push it out of the way to the side. That way you can pull this out without any obstruction. Now, if you're not as lucky as me and you have a bunch of wires that you do have to disconnect, I would suggest taking a picture of everything before you disconnect anything. That way you'll know where everything goes back after you're all done. And sometimes what happens is I'll drop the control board and I have a little bit of wiggle room, but I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to have enough room to be able to push it out of the way. So before I go and disconnect everything, what I like to do is start pulling the blower wheel out and just see if I have enough room to swivel it out. Sometimes you end up not having to disconnect anything, or you end up disconnecting a lot less than you were going to. Next up, we have to take out the screws that are holding the blower motor housing in place. There's usually going to be either one on each side or two of them. In my case, it's two. On this part, if you have a flexible bit holder, do use it because it makes life a whole lot easier. Most of the time, the size of the screws is 5/16, but sometimes it's also 3/8. Okay, now that the housing has dropped down, we should be able to just grab the whole thing and slide it out. If it's stuck, try wiggling it, and that should help it to come out. Once the whole assembly is out, go ahead and slowly flip it on its side. Keep in mind that the wires to the motor are still connected, so just make sure you don't overstrain any of the wires. Just carefully flip it over, being conscious of the wires. Just like with the wires going through the control board, I usually just leave the wires connected to the motor right on. I don't disconnect anything. The only wire that needs to come off is the one that's attached to the blower motor housing. So this ground wire comes out, and the rest of the wires can be left connected. The typical size of the bolts that are holding the motor bracket in place is usually 7/16, but they can come in a variety of different sizes, so it really helps to have a little set like this of deep socket drill bits that come in a variety of different sizes to be able to take out all the different kinds of bolts and screws that different blower motors could have. This would also be a good time to take note where the blower motor plugs come in. They're either going to be on the bottom or on the side. Whenever you're putting this motor back in, just make sure that you have it aligned so the plugs are in the same place. Now that we took those bolts out, we can go ahead and flip this whole assembly over. Again, try to do this slowly because the wires are still connected. Or if you have to, go ahead and disconnect the wires. Next up, we have to loosen the set screw that is securing the blower wheel to the motor shaft. Usually there's going to be just one set screw, sometimes there's two of them. And before you loosen the set screw, take note of where the blower motor shaft is. Mine is almost flush to this hub right here, but sometimes it'll be sticking way out. It's helpful to remember where approximately it is. That way when you're putting the blower wheel back on, you're going to know where on the blower motor shaft you should secure this set screw on. Using an adjustable crescent wrench, I'm going to go ahead and loosen that set screw to get the blower wheel off of the motor shaft. You don't have to completely take it off. I like to just loosen it and I leave it right on there. By the way, these blower wheel fins can be really sharp, so be extra careful when you're working around them, or simply just put on a pair of work gloves. After you loosen the set screw, I like to put my crescent wrench right on the shaft itself and tighten it down. One side of the shaft is going to be flat, so you can grab it with the crescent wrench, and then with your other hand, go ahead and spin the wheel by hand while holding the motor shaft in place. That way if it's stuck on, this will be able to free it up. My blower wheel came off of the shaft real easy and dropped down, but you may not be as lucky. Sometimes it's super hard to take the blower wheel off of the shaft. With my wheel, right when I loosened the set screw, the blower wheel just dropped down, but oftentimes you're going to have to put that crescent wrench on the shaft and spin the wheel in order for it to start going down. And even then it's not going to go down easily, you're going to have to press it down. And if your blower motor shaft is really rusty, you're going to want to take some sandpaper and sand it down. And last but not least, take some WD-40 or some motor oil if you have it. I have some turbine oil right here with a zoom spout. Go ahead and just oil the shaft of the motor so the oil runs into the hub right there. And as you oil it, go ahead and spin that wheel again. If your shaft is moving, grab it with the crescent wrench and just exercise it again, just to get all of that oil in there so it seeps in. I'm not being able to grab it here. There you go. Grabbed it. There you go. And just give it a good spin. I could already feel how much more freely it spins after I oiled it. Nice. So just make sure that you oil the whole motor shaft. That way when you're sliding the blower wheel off of it, it'll come off easy and it's not going to get snagged on anything. If you find yourself struggling to get the blower wheel off of the motor shaft, I have a video just for that where I show you how to deal with extremely stuck-on blower wheels. So if you need some further help, check that video out. After you're done with that, go ahead and flip this housing assembly over one more time. And now I should be able to pull this whole motor out. It usually helps if you jiggle it as you're pulling it out. Or just slam it against the housing. There it goes. We can see on the shaft right over here, this is where the set screw was tightened. Okay, and now we can move the motor out of the way. And now we have the housing fully disconnected from the furnace. So at this point you could just take this whole thing outside to wash it and clean it. In my case, my blower housing is actually really clean. I don't really need to clean it, but if yours is really dirty and dusty, then just go ahead and take the whole entire thing outside and wash the housing and the wheel. But for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and take the wheel out inside the garage here, and then we're gonna wash the blower wheel outside. In order to take the blower wheel out, we're gonna have to take these two screws out that are holding this top panel in place. And now I can go ahead and just slide this whole piece out. Guys, to be honest, I thought this blower wheel was going to be a lot dirtier than it really is. So I probably don't even need to wash it. I'm going to wash it anyway just because I got it out. But chances are, yours is a lot dirtier than this one, so it does need a wash. And by the way, when you're washing it, be careful not to knock off these weights, because then your motor is going to be disbalanced and it's going to vibrate a lot when you put this thing back together. If you want an example of a truly dirty blower wheel, check out my video where I show you how to replace a blower motor. There I show you a wheel that is super dirty and how it looks like when I clean it up. To clean the wheel and the housing, all you really need is just a hose and water. You don't need to use any kind of soap or cleaners. If the dust is really caked on, then just get a brush and scrub that down, scrub the fins down, scrub the housing down if you need to. So just water and a brush is really all you need to get that cleaned. After you got it all washed and clean, make sure you let it fully dry out before you put it all back together. Now all that's left is to put everything back together. If you don't remember how the blower wheel goes back in, which side goes on what side, an easy way to figure this out is to simply align your blower housing the way that you're going to slide it in. So it's going to be like this with our screws that hold it in place right here. And then just remember which side the motor went on. So on this furnace, the motor was on this side, which means that the set screw is going to be on the opposite side. So we got our set screw right here. That means our blower wheel is going to go in like this. Next, we have to put this top cover back on. And this end right here has to go into these brackets over here. So as you're putting it in, make sure that you see it slide in. Just like that. And now we're going to put those two screws up on top back in there as well. Once we have the top cover back on, let's go ahead and flip this over on its side. On the side that we have to mount the blower motor on. And since our blower motor plugs were facing downwards, let's go ahead and flip this over so I can put the motor in easier. Just like that. Let's slide our blower motor back in. And before I tighten the set screw on the other side, I'm just going to go ahead and tighten this motor back down so this whole side is going to be done. Let's start with the ground wire and then the 4 bolts for the motor bracket. With the bolts, you want them nice and snug, but make sure you don't over tighten them, otherwise you're going to destroy the threads and then that screw isn't going to be able to get tightened anymore. If you're using a screw gun like this one, make sure you got the torque setting set down lower. I usually do it this way to make sure that I don't over tighten it. So with a lower torque setting, I screw it in and then I finish it off by hand with that same drill, just like this. Now that the motor is screwed down, we can go ahead and flip this. And the next thing we have to do is to align the blower wheel. The easiest way to do this is to grab the hub of the blower wheel and just slide it back and forth. Just like that. Aligning it is pretty easy. You simply want the same amount of space on either side of the blower wheel. So if I just scooch this down a little bit, just like that, that is what we want. And remember how I told you to take note of how far the shaft is from the blower wheel hub? That also helps with alignment. In my case, the shaft was pretty much flush with the blower wheel hub, so we know that I have it positioned just right. The only problem is that the flat side of the shaft is actually on this side, so I am going to have to spin that around. The way I'm going to do that is by simply pushing the blower wheel in, grabbing the shaft with my fingers, and just spinning it until that set screw aligns with that flat side. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull this blower wheel back to how it was. And now we can tighten the set screw. With this one, there's no danger of over tightening it, so just get it really nice and snug. And finally, we're ready to slide this thing back in. As you're pushing it in, you do have to get down and watch it to make sure that the housing brackets are sliding into the channels correctly. Once you slide it in halfway, you have to lift the whole housing up and then push it all the way in. Once we have the screw holes lined up, we can go ahead and put all the screws back in. Put everything back that you pushed aside, and if you disconnected any wires, Go ahead and reconnect them all. Double check and triple check, make sure everything is connected. And then all we have left is the doors. Well guys, and that is all I had for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. But before you go, let me share a secret with you. Did you know that I have a PhD? That's right. In fact, you probably have one too. It's the Public High School Diploma.